tuning in to Unboxing Performance, a sports physical therapy podcast where our mission is to better understand how to define performance at all levels of play and the role that physical therapists serve in returning athletes to the game that they love.
Cue the hangover meme. We're back. We are back.
We are back. Oh, finally.
All right. Let's I know. Let's run through a little catch up. You go first.
Okay, sounds good. So let me see. 2024, finished school. That was great. Uh, Passed MPT this past October, and then now deciding to look for some positions out here in LA. Sending out some applications, have a few interviews coming up. Primarily narrowing my search to outpatient sports and ortho for the time being, and then potentially gonna reach out and do some PRN work once I get more settled into a full-time position right now. So that's kind of where we are right now with all of that going on, and happy to be around.
All right. And then for me, got it in April while I was grinding it out in that last rotation. Got to go to a playoff game, which is pretty sweet. Work a playoff game, and then
Go Nuggets.
go Nuggets, baby. And then from there, it was grind season. So I got a month off waiting for the license to come in, and then started working at the clinic, which is what you'll see. It's a Select Sports Center of Excellence, which has been really the right opportunity for me. I got to actually start to develop what a sports clinician looks like. Would not say I'm a sports clinician yet, but found the pathway. And this episode is actually one of the projects for us to help us on our way to move along that path. So spent the summer just kind of getting the feet wet, getting adjusted. It is drinking from the fire hose when you first start. Just be prepared. Like 18 to 30 evals in your first few days, and then after you get them all booked out, you get to just start treating, which is what we love. I think the evals are important, but the treatments are where the fun's at. And then so a lot of I'd say not confidence, but a lot of learning on how to progress people and use the right programs and protocols has been these last 6 months. So
Okay.
that's what we're here for.
Sharpening up your discernment.
Exactly. Yeah. So nice thing about our company is that we have some built-in Con Ed, which takes us through our whole return to sports program from lower extremity and upper extremity, when to begin what things, kind of using that breakdown of return to practice, return to sport, return to performance. Where do we fit? Where's the handoff? How to be, building relationships with the ETC or the coach, or if that stuff's not available, what role do you need to play? And then some metrics and stuff. We have force plates in our clinic, so we've got to work with the vault representatives. We have a pretty good idea now of some data in different phases, from like max protect and mod protect, timing. Most of it done with ACL because that's where most of the research is, but you can apply it to most lower extremity injuries. Upper extremities still tends to be, a little bit more gray. But yeah, so it's just in work and then learn, work and then learn, work and then learn. Now we're here. Now it's time to start adding pieces. So my goal for the next year is I start my SCS prep in next month. OCS prep starts in April. Take those at the end of the year, 2025. Just add 6 more letters to the name, pending I pass. And then
Pending
I pass, and then just try to build more connections in the area. So part of what this is me reaching out to some of the lacrosse clubs locally. Got a relationship with a team up north that we're going to be trying to be their main referral provider for, but then also giving some ROA back to them. How do we help their players be the best that they can be? Where does PT fit? And how do we basically set them up for success if their goal is to go to the next level? So, without further ado, here is what I've been working on for the past 3 months. Kind of fitting.
I'm on the edge of my seat.
Yeah, kind of fitting
Where's it at? Okay,
that
there
it's
we go.
that it's going to be in lacrosse since that's my background. But it's also the easiest place for me to get into to start. So I had the idea of what would be beneficial for coaches, organizations, players, and parents to know. And my thinking was, what are the most likely things to occur? So what are the most common injuries? And I found some good papers through the NCAA database tracking.
Hmm.
They were really, really helpful to break it all down. And then what are some risk factors for those common injuries? What's the amount of time you usually lose with those injuries? And then what are some prevention programs out there now? And then where do we go? What's the next steps?
Right.
So, can you hear the dogs?
No.
Perfect. Okay, let's jump into it. Is it still playing on your end?
Yep.
All right. This is
Are
my intro
are you able to
stuff.
put it to like presenter mode?
Is it not on presenter mode?
It looks like an edit page.
Oh.
Can
Uh,
you click play?
I did click play. What's it look like now? Is it working?
Nothing.
Ah, tough.
So
There's large, small. Oh, that's interesting. I don't know
whoa,
if I like. I don't know if I like that, but I don't hate it. Um,
a little bubble.
oh, so this doesn't go well with that. That's unfortunate. Well, I guess we'll go through the presenter style.
Sounds good.
All right, so take that out. This was my background that I just kind of set up. Doesn't really matter for what we're doing today.
Yeah.
But
Plus, you
the
already
object,
kind of went through that.
yeah. So our objectives are just what are the most common injuries sustained by the lacrosse athlete? What's the average margin of time loss, as I explained? What are the risk factors that have been associated with those injuries? And then are these injury prevention programs out there, efficacious? Um, so most of the injuries that they tracked required, or over half the injuries they required, more than one day to return to sports. So it means that if you sustain an injury, every other injury that occurs, someone's sitting out, which is a cost to that player. So this is looking at the college level. If a guy sits out, there's the next guy's taking up your spot, right? So the
Hmm.
risk of injury could be, change your scholarship, change your play time, change the impact you have on the sport for your team. So there's a cost there that's physical, but there's also a cost there that's social, psychological, and so if you looked at all the injuries that did require sitting out for a certain period of time, the average would be 11 days, which is pretty high. That's a week. That's 2 games, 3 games in a season that you're out. If you're not available, you don't play. And the best ability is availability. Knee injuries, most common, thigh injuries, ankle injuries below that, and then head and face injuries. Most injury, most common injury type would be a strain. So those muscle tendinous injuries followed by the sprains. After that, it's contusions. Not surprising in a contact sport when you're playing with a big metal stick and you're trying to hit somebody. But strains and sprains being the most common, and the mechanism most of the time it's non-contact. Now the contusions are probably coming from your contact, right? You can't really have a contusion without that. But the non-contact injuries, those are the ones that are most common. Those are your strains. Those are your non-contact sprains, your ankles, your ACLs, all that kind of stuff. And then the overuse injuries, which are more common in practice and off season than they are in season or right in preseason.
Hmm.
Not surprising if you're not familiar with lacrosse. There's 4 main positions. You could break it down more than that, but goalie, and then defense right in front of that, midfielders and attack. Midfielders are your workhorses. There's the ones that are sprinting on and off the field with changeovers. At the high school level, they might be staying on, running multiple runs, playing defense and offense. College, sometimes you got guys that run two ways. Some guys just play O, some guys just play D, who specialize a little bit more. But these guys cover the most ground. They do get more breaks, but anytime they're on the field, they're operating at a real high speed and covering a lot of ground. And then
Okay.
unsurprisingly, D3 has the highest injury rate. Now, I'm kind of reading off the slides here, but you can kind of infer why. D3 has the lower budgets. They're not going to have the same sports medicine programs. Maybe they don't have a PT on staff, or they don't have the extra students. If they don't have an ATC program in that school like ours, where you're getting a junior and a senior assistant who are helping up your ATC, maybe you're not getting nearly as much one-on-one time. And then your facilities are usually smaller. If your facilities are smaller, your personnel smaller. So your strength and conditioning programs might not be as robust. You might not have the same equipment if you go from down the road, a junior college versus USC out by you, or DU out by us, where you have this real high level and investment from research, evidence, and money to get you the right guys and the right pieces of equipment that you need to make sure these guys are ready and available. And NCAA 3 is going to have the highest amount of players. So not only is it important for you to understand what's going on with your body, where you might have some risk factors that you want to adjust, especially prior to going, but there's more guys there who are getting hurt and more guys to
Hmm.
get hurt. And then less people
Yeah.
to provide that rehab program too on the back end. So if you do get hurt for all the same reasons we spent about the reason you might get hurt beforehand, you don't have as much people available to help you out to get back.
Yeah. Sounds like a slippery
So
slope overall.
yeah, it's tough. It is what you sign up for. You kind of know that going in. Doesn't change the facts.
Hmm.
So the three most common injuries lacrosse players have: concussions. Right, the trend rate continues to decrease each year. Part of that could be better reporting. Part of it could be better assessment. Part of it is there's an increase in the number of players, and one of the things that, at least in recent memory, and this is not based off research, this is anecdotal for me, the helmet technology has not changed. They come out with new forms. They got a little bit better boas in the back to make it a little bit more secure to your head, but the robustness of a football helmet with air compression inside, it's more form fitted. And the NFL having a high budget and research projects with the NFLPA to investigate and try to improve on the back end with the helmet manufacturers. It's a little bit better than what we got with lacrosse. Smaller sport, smaller investment all around, less research, not having the same level of investment in trying to make those helmets a little bit more secure, more snug, or decrease the amount of sloshing that you get with concussions. And then for your joint injuries, the most common one's going to be your lateral ankle ligament sprain or tear. Same thing, just the severity. And then the hamstring strains. That's your number three. So those are your top three most common injuries that you have in lacrosse.
Hmm.
And then if you want to look at the amount of time you lose by each of those, a concussion that has post-concussive symptoms, 20 to 21 days. This varied across sport, males and females. 20 to 21 days is the average. A couple of different studies there giving a similar answer. So, like we said earlier, that's 3 weeks. 3 weeks could in the season could be 6 games. I think we played 20 total games in the regular season. Maybe it was 18. Regardless, you make 6 games. That's you know anywhere from a quarter to a third of your season right there that you miss by being out with a concussion. Not to mention the change in your performance. Right, you're not be able to. You're going to have a loss in conditioning. You might have a loss in strength because you can't operate the same level that you were prior to injury. So you have those 3 weeks to get back and available, but you're still not at that same performance level. Severe ankle sprains, those can take anywhere up to 28 days. Didn't really classify what a severe ankle sprain was. My assumption is that it's your grade two, grade threes. Grade three is taking a lot longer. Grade twos, maybe a little bit more conservative management taking up that time. But one of the things that the literature noted is those less severe ankle sprains, those minor ones, those grade ones, we get you back ASAP. And the criteria for return isn't as standardized as it should be across the industry. And there's a good chance that maybe you didn't even see a PT or your sports doc to go and decide to get you back. right? You tweak your ankle, you might not even report it. Your ATC says, "Oh, let's ice you up, give you some compression, and kind of leave it up to you." Or maybe you got a really good ATC and say, "Hey, that's not good. We got some other stuff that goes on when you hurt your ankle." Um, but generally, it seems like it's a rapid return to sport timeline, and whatever the risks are from aren't being mitigated prior to return, and that's why we get a
Hmm.
lot of re-injury rates. Hamstring
Okay.
strains, those are tough. Depending on, and I was just reading through this with the Bruckner and Context book, but we're learning a little bit more and more about muscular strains, and how deep some of those tendons insert, or if there's a central tendon through the entire muscle, or things that run a little bit deeper. Depending on where you get that muscle strain, if it's purely muscle, it's going to go a little bit faster. Might be in that 20, 24, or 28-day range. If you get a tendinous contribution, it could go anywhere up to 70 days, just because it takes that much longer for that tendon to heal up as opposed to that muscle. A little bit less
Yeah.
vascularity, a little bit different role in managing tension, and irritability. So those hamstring strains can vary a lot. And with every single category there, it could range from 3 to 4 weeks or more. So that's a lot of time lost by these athletes who get hurt with these most common injuries.
Yeah. Was there for the hamstring strain, did you find any correlation of like in re-injury prevalence, or was that just kind of look at the draw with the research you found on the lateral ankle sprains?
Um, that was more the luck of the draw with the lateral ankle sprains and the re-injury rates. Um, I'm sure there's more out there if I keep diving deeper. Um,
Hmm.
and we cover a little bit of what is the mechanism, so that could be
Yeah.
a part of it too. And if you're not,
Okay.
addressing whatever that original mechanism or risk factor was, then that re-injury rate's going to be higher because that risk is still there.
Stands to reason.
Some other components that I wanted to throw in there, just because these are the ones you hear about a lot, and just based on how those midfielders and those attackmen, even those defenders play. The knees just, and since it was the most common site to be injured, some of the other knee sprains that are out there is the MCL. Now, luckily, super highly vascular. The average between all gradings was 24 days for grade one. So that low grade one, it's still 10 days before return. So it's still keeping you out for that, a little over a week, 2 to 3 games maybe, depending on your season structure. For the ACL, obviously that's the big boy that we all kind of talk about. If it's
Right.
your first time tearing your ACL, your average return is 226 days. It's your whole year, and or just under a year, depending on what's your anatomy, what's your biology, who is your surgeon, what was your graft type, what was your rehab like, what was the tools you had access to, what was your sleep like, how was your psychology, what are all these other impending factors on top of natural healing, and then quad capacity retraining, getting back into strength, power, and then finally return to sport there towards the end. And if it's your re-injury, right? If you've already torn your tear again, or it's your second ACL, it takes even longer. Not by a lot, but enough. It's another 20 days or so, so another 3 weeks. Questions on those?
Not in particular. ACL, we're talking just pure rupture or any kind of strain or injury.
Um, Rupture was this
Okay.
data. Yeah.
Okay.
So it did these ones I believe excluded meniscus contributions, articular cartilage contributions, PCL, MCL, LCL contributions, purely ACL rupture.
Okay. And is it, did they narrow any kind of graphing type, or is it pretty much all lump
This was
sum?
across all.
Okay.
Across all.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dive into what are the risk factors for injury. So if we're looking at the ankle injury, our modifiable risk factors that are shown to have some correlation would be your hop testing. So looking at your LSI index. Hop testing could be your single hop, your triple hop, your crossover hop, your 6 meter time top. Those last two, crossover and 6 meter time top, from what I've been hearing and learning, is that those are the ones that are going to give you your most bang for your buck. They require the most motor control, so variance between those two tests opposed to just your single horizontal hop, vertical hop, or triple hop. It's just not as robust as those last two tests. No
Hmm.
one test is good, right? You can't rely on one test. If you rely on
Right.
one test, you're going to miss out on other things. You're not actually, clearing through return to sport. There's a lot of um, clinical assessment and inclusion of test results that are required. But again, that's one modifiable risk factor that has been shown. Limited dorsiflecting range of motion. That could be, looking at your active range of motion, your passive range of motion on the table, your ankle lunge test. You could also, when this kind of goes to the next bullet, with your weakness asymmetries and motor control, or your static and dynamic postural imbalances, looking at
Hmm.
your Y balance assessment. So you can't pick out one joint with the Y balance. You can only assess it as a whole. So it's in a motor control test with your static postural balance and proprioception. But having limited dorsiflexion range of motion would also bar you from your ability to get that same equal reach. Same thing if you have weakness through your lateral hip musculature, eccentric or isometric quad control, hamstring, and then of course all the muscles around the ankle. So the Y balance is still a pretty good test consistently. The other thing that's really interesting with ankle injuries is your fatigue. There's a higher rate of, I won't say most of, lateral ankle sprains occurring near the end of the game, that fourth quarter. That is a modifiable risk factor. If your fatigue is setting in, that could be, a conditioning problem. It could be a sleep problem. It could be a diet problem. Those are all things that can be addressed. It could be um, social problem as well. Are you just going through some stuff um, socially or at home or in your own mind? But fatigue is a big risk factor for those, especially with those end of game injuries. How
Hmm.
robust are you as an athlete? There's that one. Ready for the next?
Yeah.
And then so looking at the hamstring, the data here is way more murky. Ankle's got a little bit more solid stuff. Even the articles in here, which I only have one good one that really kind of dove into most of it. It states that we look at this with a grain of salt, but these may be a factor. So you're looking at the sudden increases. Consider your athlete who goes home over winter break. This is for lacrosse, but you can consider the offseason. So maybe summer break for a football guy, or fall for a basketball player coming back in. You're going to jump right into that preseason training, high level of conditioning, with the expectation that you did your conditioning when you weren't there. And if you weren't doing that, that's when you get your big sudden increase in workload. Could be higher speeds that you were training at, higher volume, um, and or higher frequency, right? Maybe you were training once or twice a week. Now you're training 3 or 4 times a week. That's where we get to see those higher hamstring injuries, and those hamstring strains was a
Hmm.
sudden increase in workload. So coming back onto campus, coming back after breaks, shifting gears between seasons, off season, preseason, you're working way harder. You're gonna have a bigger jump. Going into season, you're gonna have a little bit of a fall off period. So you might have a ramp down. And it's up to the athlete and those who educate the athletes to make sure that those troughs and valleys aren't too wide, so that when you do have those increases, you're not putting that hamstring at risk of a strain. Um, the other thing that they consider is it happens often with the eccentric control piece. So if you're not having to go through high eccentric ranges that snap forward, that's when you're going to get that muscle damage, and often does also occur during fatigue states. So if you're low conditioning, sudden increase, not having a good eccentric control of that knee joint, that's where you're going to get that, trying to get those fast speeds. Other
Hmm.
things that they said, that the strength deficit, you could include that in the eccentric control piece, or your eccentric strength. Um, Flexibility, range of motion, mobility, unsure to be consequential. There just wasn't enough correlation points to say, hey, these things are a factor. They may be, but we're not sure. We do know that
Okay.
workload management and progression is an essential piece to reducing risk of hamstring injury. That's the one piece that we know for sure is if you're throwing in a high level with a huge shift in workload, that's where you're going to have someone at risk. And that's a modifiable factor.
Gotcha. This
Uh,
uh this
yeah,
slide is the one that uh, triggered my thought about the article I sent you talking about muscular imbalances and strength
Hmm.
deficits, because I feel like there at one point was tie-ins of asymmetries of agonist and antagonistic muscles within a certain poundage
Hmm.
that created a higher risk for injuries in athletes.
Okay.
Um, that was one thing. Well, that was partially the reason why I sent you that article was to give you another viewpoint as to why strength in itself has a higher correlation than the flexibility and range of motion for injury.
Okay.
Just bring out some more perspective that strength, when we think about it, we also have to consider strength as imbalances in certain muscle groups.
Agonist, antagonist. Yeah. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't have the data on on this slide deck, but looking at abductor and adductor strength, the lower extremity, quad hamstring ratio is a relatively valuable one. Probably more things that we could look at, but some studies that I've seen are like 67% to 70%. You want your hamstring to be at, 2/3 to 70% the same, you know, force production level as the quad. Now, most of that's looking at isometric. It doesn't consider isokinetic. It doesn't include max power, different angles. So there's
Mhm.
definitely limitations in assessment, but generally we understand you got to have some balance. The
Right.
question is, what's the best way to test it?
Exactly. Haven't got that far yet.
Well, when you find the answers, we'll throw them up. That'll be the next project.
I know. We'll start looking.
That is some of the things that you can't modify that just put you at a higher level of risk. Older age. Now, what is older age? That's a term thrown out. You could maybe it's a someone who's in their fourth decade, fifth decade of life, playing in some weekend warrior stuff, but maybe it's just someone who's got a high number of athletic exposures. A kid
Hmm.
who's been a quad tri-sport athlete since he was 12 years old, who's got a really high training age, plays at a high level, trains in the off season, does all his conditioning, doesn't really get a true off season because he's jumping between, jumping between, jumping between. Think about fatigue there. That could be an older age, thinking about the effect that it's had on um, the musculoskeletal system. History, can't change your history. If you had a hamstring injury, you're still likely to have another one. If you have an ACL injury, 70% more likely to have a secondary hamstring injury or have a hamstring injury. The only thing that study didn't specify was whether that it was a hamstring graft or not. But with the rates of hamstring tendinopathy following a hamstring autograft, I'd be curious to see if that was part of it.
Hmm.
And then if you've had a calf strain, that also puts you 50% higher risk as to someone who hasn't had a calf strain for a hamstring strain injury. Um, think about the running system. If you lose power at the
Yeah.
quad or the calf, you got to make it up somewhere else, or maybe your mechanics have
Yeah.
changed if you didn't fully rehab that. There's the overlapping insertion points of the calf and the hamstring, posterior capsule of the knee. Uh, Interesting factors, but can't specify the exact mechanism. But we know that there's a correlation there.
Hmm. Compensatory faults in some way.
Mhm. This one is a really interesting one. I dove into this one a little bit deeper since it was one of the most common injuries is concussions. What are the modifiable factors? Are there any modifiable factors? And three main things that I was able to find was neck strength, cue collars, which are getting more and more research, and mouth guards. So the interesting thing about training neck strength. Now, this was a poorly written component, in my opinion, because it doesn't actually give you a true understanding of what's the starting point and does 1 pound really give you 5% more and how do you actually math that. But they reported that for every pound of neck strength, primarily neck flexors, you decrease the risk by 5% for a sports related concussion. The neck flexors really are just resisting that whip component So you're able to decelerate a little bit better, um, which means if you can decelerate, you're going to be able to control the amount of sloshing that occurs in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
I had one headphone die. And then on top of that, so that's strength. You could also consider endurance as a piece of that too. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I still hear you.
Okay, I'm just going to switch my microphone. Oh, can't change it, darn. All right. Well, as long as you can hear me, that's the important part.
Yeah.
Um,
With real quick, with neck strength, would this be something you try to suggest to athletes as moving forward into their strength program to train neck musculature? Or how would you go about educating athletes on this fact?
yeah, because I haven't done enough probably Therex diving in. I'm not 100% sure exactly where I'll go. That's definitely something I want to add, but good way to assess it are a couple things. We have two tests that we already know that we could do. You got a handheld
Hmm.
dynamometer. You could assess cervical flexion and supine. Find out what's their max force production, and then what's their max extension, and give a target from that perspective. But we don't have standardized data, so it's going to be anecdotal on what you think would be appropriate for them. What's their history of neck injury? What's their history of, or what's their subjective history in general? Have they had a concussion before? How much do you think you should add, or what would be an appropriate level to get to? It's kind of throwing darts at a board based on what you see clinically. And then
Hmm.
for endurance, you can always do the CCF DNF test. So how
Yeah.
long can they hold that elevated position at whatever um, PSI or whatever the millimeters of mercury is the standardized one. But so you
Yeah.
can train cervical flexor endurance. You could train extensor endurance and quadruped, um, or prone, I guess, too. And then you can assess what's their, max force production with a handheld dynamometer. But as far as standardize on what's the goal, I don't know that there's one yet.
Okay. Okay. So some area for growth in our
Yeah,
field.
definitely finding. It's awesome that we're getting some data, uh, but there's now we got to answer the next questions, which is exactly
Yeah.
what you said. How do we adapt that? What
How
do
do
we
we,
use?
yeah. How's it applied?
Yeah. I'm going to skip to mouth guards. It's been pretty consistently shown in the studies that have actually looked at it that it may reduce the risk, um, but it's not studied in all sports and it's not studied in all demographics. So it's probably helpful, but we don't know. This next one I think is really fascinating. The Q collars. You started seeing them if you were into lacrosse more frequently. If like Michael Sowers was a big um, player in college who I think I was the first guy I saw wearing it. Essentially, it wears uh, it's like this little compressive collar device, reduces the venous flow back down, increases the amount of fluid in the brain with the mechanism idea that it's going to reduce the amount of sloshing that occurs when you have a subconcussive impact, whether it's direct or indirect. But so there's actually some studies out there now. Most of the ones that I saw so far are women's soccer, and um, for the subconcussive impact. So someone who didn't sustain a concussion, they did a whole bunch of MRIs through functional MRIs through the season. So they had prior to season, mid season, end of season, and then off season, and then right before the season starts. So it just cycled through, and they were in those players that did not sustain a clinical diagnosis of a concussion, so subconcussive impacts, repeated head balls, or anything like that without concussion symptoms, there was a white matter change from end of season to the beginning of the next season. So during the off season, there was a repair mechanism that was shown. Some things were changing. If you
Hmm.
looked at those same demographic, no concussion, no symptoms, change, or sorry, look at their functional MRI at the end of the season and before the season. There was no change in the white matter if they wore a Q collar. That's fascinating. there was no repair mechanism necessary in those players
Hmm.
to indicate that they had sustained multiple subconcussive impacts on with an impact on the brain. It suggests that it's protective against subconcussive impact and may mitigate results if you do get a concussion. That's the correlation they draw. Um, but I think that's a fascinating thing to consider, that if you look at the functional MRIs of someone who doesn't wear a collar and someone who does, the amount of change that occurs in your brain is less with a collar.
Mm.
That's neat to
I
me.
That is very neat.
Now, limited studies. Um,
Yeah.
so I think the powers were, satisfactory. Needed more sports. Need to look at, football. Need to look at basketball, soccer. Obviously, there's a lot of high contacts. It's a high rate of concussion sustained, especially in women's soccer, um, and lacrosse and hockey and all the other sports. But as a, looking into the matter, that's pretty cool that that's coming out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any
It
questions on those?
justifies. No, I think the Q collar is fascinating, and that this article you kind of mentioned does justify a deeper dive into multiple sports, higher effect size, and seeing if it truly helps mitigate or if it just was a look of the draw with this article.
Right. So more studies, more people, more sports, more wider ranges
Hmm.
of age groups. Like I think this was, can't remember if it was college or high school, but it was younger athletes. Doesn't look at professional. There's rules with collective bargaining agreements on how much data you can collect, and then you got to submit to get approval to use the data. Um, so
Yeah, a
didn't
lot
look
of
at
hoops.
professional, more hoops at the professional level, but at the youth and collegiate level and high school level, um, that's what we're seeing so far. Just need more. Just need
Hmm.
more. All right. So, what are the programs out there? There's three things that I really found. For hamstring injuries, utilization of a Nordic protocol could reduce the risk between 45 and 65%, which is pretty dang high. So, cutting it almost in half to reduce your hamstring risk injury. Nordic hamstrings, if you don't know, are a eccentric way of training. You can do it with um, a multitude of different equipments. They got some new home training ones. So you can hook it over a door to lock those heels in. So you can basically do a hamstring lowering from kneeling or tall kneeling. There, you can do it on a reverse hyper machine. You can do it with a partner. You can lock yourself up into a squat rack. Vald, who's our supplier for our force plates, has a Nord board, which is kind of cool, where it'll track the amount of power and force that you're putting through those hamstrings as you're doing it. So you get some pretty cool data, and you can look side to
Hmm.
side. Uh, Very expensive, not applicable for most populations. You can use a handheld dynamometer and assess change over time. Um, Usually a little bit more accessible for most clinics, but definitely something worth peeking at. Use of Nordic programs. The protocol is in the article. All the references are at the end. We'll leave the QR code that I have available up for a little while so you can scan it if you decide to queue in. And then the two other things that we found, and this article looked at ankle injuries and compared the FIFA 11 plus and specific balance training programs, or balance twice. Um, and it could reduce the risk of ankle injuries from 36% with the FIFA 11 Plus programming, 41% for the specific balance training programs. Both of those protocols are available, again, in the references, but it does show that there are prevention programs out there that are effective. We just need
Hmm.
more. That's really the big thing. I couldn't really pull much more than that. Those are the big things. The specific balance training program is in there in the appendices, I believe. And then the FIFA 11 Plus is pretty widely available now, based off originally the FIFA 11, which showed no factor, no change. The 11 Plus program actually showed modifiable change.
Okay.
So if you don't know what those
I
are,
hear you.
definitely go check them out. I didn't know what they are until I started this project. I don't think a lot of non-sports people would know about it. Um, if that's not something you're looking for, right? One of the
Yeah.
things that I've found since actually starting and being a clinician is if you're not looking for, you're not going to find anything. You got to be on top of it all the time. Be interested in something. Doesn't matter if it's sports, doesn't matter if it's vestibular, oncology. Stay interested and go look it up. Go research. What's new? What can I find? What can I use? Especially if you're having trouble with a patient, right? Um,
Right.
I had a trying to find a good story here. You know, I got an interesting ACL case that from a skier where the comment was the only thing left intact was the popliteal artery, which is probably not a great thing you should say to a patient. Came from the ortho, but pretty severe. The MCL, like most of the things were torn, and
Yeah.
we were struggling to get some quad capacity back. And it, you know, we try. I went to the research, tried a couple different exercises. Eventually, we found one that was effective. And then our Vald tech comes in. He's like, "All right, these are the metrics we're looking for." Gave us a new target, a new goal for that patient to work towards with single leg hopping or single leg jumping. Looking at eccentric peak velocity. How comfortable are you going through that down phase prior to jumping? Not just your landing, but loading your jump, preparing to generate force. That was something interesting, and only happens if you're interested. If you don't stay interested in something, you're going to miss out on something new. It might be a benefit for your
Yeah.
patient.
Mm. It was very motivational of you.
Try to be sometimes.
Yeah.
I the mantra that I started repeating to myself in May and June was refuse to be average. That's the mantra. That's 2025.
Yeah.
Refuse to be average.
2025, baby. Refuse to be average. We should hashtag that.
You should refuse to be
Unless you
average.
heard,
I like it.
unless someone already did.
Maybe. I mean, who
Yeah.
cares? Hashtags and mantras are not, IP. They're not property. They're not
Yeah.
trademarked.
That's fair.
Well, probably not
Yeah.
trademarked or copyrighted. Maybe Taco Tuesday was. That was funny. Um,
Who knew?
or tried to be. But so other thing, and we're gonna have this open dialogue on the recording, and then you guys can comment or send us an email if you think it's interesting. If you want to do it, I kind of want to start a secondary series in between our unboxing performance episodes, starting next season for football, where we look at all the injuries that occurred that week and break them down
Yeah.
on mechanism, time loss, um, and then like return to performance rates. I think that'd be something that'd be pretty fun to do. Very clippable,
Yeah.
very clippable.
Very clippable.
Can throw some graphics in there. Good for us, but also good information. Talk about why those injuries occur. I think it'd be something fun.
Yeah. We'd have to iron out those details a little bit more later on. But overall, very doable.
Got a great name for it. I'll hold on to the name
I was
for
gonna
now,
say, don't
but
spoil it yet. We'll
I won't spoil
keep
it.
that,
But
keep it vaulted. Keep it vaulted.
yeah, lock it up. Throw the key away till
Yeah.
September. September 25. New series dropping. Maybe, maybe.
Maybe. Maybe. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Um, did you end up reading that article that you sent to me that I haven't gotten to yet?
I found it this morning. Overall, it seems good. I like that it's so recent, published in 21, because
Okay.
I think the last article I found that was relevant to that degree was from 2009. Not
Hmm.
super outdated, but older.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna probably read it a little bit more this afternoon and see if it holds more relevance than I think it does right now.
Hmm.
But I'll keep you posted on that.
Okay. So going forward, we talked about some projects. Um, what do you what are you thinking for next episode?
Next episode, we have a few options, I feel like at this point. We have notes to talk about ice and heat that
Yeah,
I made a
Culver's
long
hot.
time ago.
I know.
Um, there were some other things we had. We can't do case report because I don't have any cases
Yet,
yet.
yet,
And then,
soon.
did we ever talk about stim?
Like use of reverse contractions in rehab through
Yeah,
electrical stim.
yeah,
No, but I still think it's a good one on when to use stim versus EMG biofeedback.
right.
Um, and what are the pros, cons, and efficacy? Because I'm sure there's some stuff out there,
Yeah,
especially with the price of EMG getting cheaper and access getting higher.
access is a lot higher. There's so many different ones nowadays, I feel like.
I really
Like
like the
ev
ones that gamify things. I think that gets really good patient buy-in, and I'm curious. Can't really get that the same way with a good old Russian stem.
right.
I wonder if
Helps
the
to see what you're
gamifying has a
doing.
I wonder if it has a better impact on patient outcomes.
Could be some
We'll
psychosocial
see.
tie-in,
Hmm.
just
Okay.
increases motivation.
Well, I think
All
that
right.
about wraps up whatever episode number this is. I don't remember where we finished, but we're back. We're gonna try
I
and do
believe this is
more.
8 or 9.
Double digits, didn't we?
We'll look into it.
We'll look into it. It'll be titled. It'll be
Yeah,
numbered.
it'll be numbered.
Alrighty. Well, until next
All
episode.
right.
Shoots,
Back to
boys
it.
and girls.
Here we are. All right, shoots.